Good morning and welcome all, and thank you for joining us today. Holocaust Remembrance Day, also called Yom Hashoah, was originally established by the Israeli government in 1953 as a day for the citizens of Israel to remember those murdered during the Holocaust. It is a solemn day, beginning at sunset of the 27th of the Hebrew month of Nisan and ending the following evening according to the traditional Jewish custom of marking a day. Over the past decades, Yom HaShoah has become a day commemorated by Jewish communities and individuals worldwide. In cities around the globe, many gather to read aloud the names of Jews and other victims of Nazi persecution killed in the Holocaust. Our Elon community has joined this tradition to emphasize the depth of loss by reading the names of Holocaust victims from the steps of the Mosley Center. You were all invited to participate in this act of remembrance by joining us on the steps of Mosley on Monday for the reading of names of those who perished in the Shoah. Today, we want to connect and share a few moments of reflection to commemorate the lives of those who died as a result of the racial purity measures in German-controlled Europe during World War II. And we also will remind the public of the terrible deeds that can be carried out when bigotry, hatred, and indifference are regarded as normal. Following the Yizkor, Elon students, faculty, and staff will be reading informal texts and personal accounts and recollections of Jewish victims of the Holocaust, some who perished, some who survived, before we light candles and then end our ceremony with the Mourner's Kaddish. If you haven't yet, this is a great moment also to silence your phones, and I will hand over to Rabbi Maor.
We begin with silence, the silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. There are no words to reach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence. The silence of Job, the silence of the 6 million, the silence of memory. Let us remember them as we link our silences. The traditional prayer for the dead in Judaism is El Maleh Rachamim, which I will recite with additions in memory for the 6 million who have died. I invite you to please rise as you are able. El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Bameromim, Hamse Menucha Nachona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malot Kedoshim Utorim Gezohar Arakia Mazhirim, Lenishmot Kol Acheinu B'nei Yisrael Shenitbechu Vashoah Nashim V'tav Shenecheneku Shenisrefu Shenehegeru Shemasru Et Nafsham Al Kiddush Hashem Began Eden Tye Menuchatam Ana Ba'al Rachamim Astirem Beseter Kanfecha Leolamim Utzror bitzror achayim et nishmotehem. Adonai hu nachalatam, ve'yanuchu ve'shalom al mishkevotehem. V'nomar Amen. You may be seated.
The Holocaust, or Shoah, is the term for the murder of around 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and their collaborators during the Second World War. Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazis sought to eliminate the entire Jewish community of Europe. Jews were murdered by death squads called Einsatzgruppen or transported to extermination camps. 6 million of the 11 million European Jews perished. The Holocaust mainly occurred in Eastern Europe, in places such as Poland and Ukraine, but there were also Nazi persecutions in North African countries like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya. The term Holocaust can also refer to the orchestrated murder of Roma. Other groups were also targeted by the Nazi regime: disabled people, Soviet prisoners of war and civilians, Polish civilians, members of the LGBT community, socialists, communists, and trade unionists, Freemasons, and Jehovah's Witnesses. The Nazis did not act alone. Countries which were occupied by the Nazis during World War II, such as Lithuania and the Ukraine, assisted the perpetrators. To gain an understanding of the Holocaust, it's important not to look only at the acts of perpetrators, but also the experiences of victims, survivors, and their children. And even though it is impossible to truly understand the victims' experiences, and even though nothing can prepare us to encounter the horror of this crime, it is still important to take scope of this genocide, to understand how millions of people were deprived of humanity.
Every year, we choose to focus on one group connected to the Holocaust to create a more in-depth understanding of their particular experiences. This year, we chose to focus on the Jews of North Africa and how the Holocaust touched them. In most of the history written on the Second World War, North Africa assumes secondary importance as compared with the main arenas of Europe and the Pacific War. In general, British interests in maintaining free access to the Suez Canal in Egypt and French as well as Italian colonial interests across the top of Africa fade in importance against the massive confrontation ignited by conflicting German-Soviet aspirations in Europe. However, the theater of North Africa, which included the British on the one side and the Axis powers of Germany and Italy on the other, was characterized by extensive battles between those powers that were intensely felt by the soldiers who fought there as well as the civilians who lived there, among them also Jewish communities. Morocco and Algeria suffered under the French pro-Nazi Vichy regime, and Tunisia and Libya suffered German and Italian occupation.
On the eve of World War II, there were 400,000 Jews in North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, also known as the Maghreb, meaning Arab North Africa, and another 30,000 Jews in Libya. The fate of the Jews in North Africa was different depending on the country in which they were located. In Libya, which was an Italian colony, thousands of Jews were sent to labor camps and concentration camps, and almost 600 died in these camps from hunger and disease. In the three North African countries that fell under the regime of Vichy, France, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, the fate of the Jews was likewise different depending on the country. The Jews of Algeria, who held French citizenship, were stripped of their rights, required to wear an identifying mark, and subjected to admission quotas, even in primary school. In Morocco, where Jews had civil rights but were not citizens of France, anti-Jewish laws were less rigorously enforced. The Jews of Algeria and Morocco were spared the fate of their brethren in Europe because the tide of the war turned against the German forces led by General Erwin Rommel at the Battle of El Alamein. Beginning in November 1942, the Allies began to liberate North Africa. Tunisia was the only country among the three that the Germans actually occupied. The German army entered Tunisia together with a SS unit tasked with applying anti-Jewish policy, creating forced labor camps and organizing deportations of Jews to the extermination camps the Nazis were operating in Central Europe. The vast majority of the Jews of Tunisia escaped deportation and death only because in early May 1943, military developments forced the German army to retreat. We will recount some of their unique experiences, listen to a musical interlude by Twisted Measure, and offer personal reflections before we light candles for all the victims that perished during the Holocaust.
In December 1940, the British military launched an attack on Italian forces in western Egypt and eastern Libya. Then, in the spring of 1941, the Nazis joined Italian forces to push the British back out of Libya, and the territory exchanged hands multiple times. In 1942, as the British were once again forced out of Libya, Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini passed an order for Jews in the region to be deported to labor camps. The following reading is taken from the writings of Amishadai Quetta, a Libyan Jew interned in a camp called Sidi Aziz. About 10 days before Rosh Hashanah, the first enlisted people were sent. On rickety trucks without inspection, without organization, and in no order, everyone crowded and standing, hundreds of boys and heads of family were sent mercilessly, cut off from their relatives, and abandoned in a place within the Libyan desert sands, Sidi Aziz. They lived in tents, destitute, and most of them lay on the ground. Snakes and scorpions ran all around them, and annoying mosquitoes disturbed their moments of sleep. Their food was only bread and murky water, sparingly, which was pumped mercifully from the Bedouin wells, quelling their thirst somewhat. From early morning until dusk, the exiles were engaged in all kinds of grunt work, laying the Libya-Egypt railroad under the scorching sun and at the hands of cruel taskmasters. The days of awe had come. Instead of the elegant and glorious synagogue, a small, meager, low-rise tent was erected. Instead of 7 ornate Torah scrolls decorated with flowers, only one Torah scroll was used. Instead of freshly ironed clothes, the worshipers wore dirty, torn clothing. Instead of the smell of perfume, the smell of sweat and grime. The severe water shortage prevented the worshipers from bathing and washing their clothes. Of course, prayers on the night of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were held in the dark because of the prohibition against turning on lights during the war. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the days of awe for which fathers and sons filled the synagogues en masse until no room remained to pour out whispering in the glory of holiness and melancholy melodies, turned into days of sadness, grief, and sorrow. The rumors of the Nazi extermination camps caused endless worry and anxiety, both in the hearts of detainees and in the hearts of their relatives, all worried about their own fates. The sorrow of separation from their families was especially felt by the prisoners at the closing prayer that Yom Kippur. At this time, in which all Jews from Tripoli used to bring their children, including the babies, to the synagogues for the priestly blessing, there was a shared and strong feeling. The question of, will I return to see my children? Nibbling at their hearts. And with tears on their faces and a broken, gloomy heart, they uttered the most sublime and special prayers of the year. There is no doubt that the tears of these depressed people rose to the heavens and the next day.
The following excerpt is from the diary of Mohammed Arezki Berkani, an Algerian Muslim who was imprisoned in 1941 for his anti-colonial activities. He was sent to a labor camp in the Algerian Sahara, where he was housed with Jewish prisoners and wrote about their daily life in the camp. In this selection, he focuses on the role of an oppressive camp overseer named Derrico, and he highlights how he and his fellow inmates respond to Derrico's actions. This was not all. He was always searching for new ways to create problems between internees. He demolished a wall that separated the first section of the camp from the second section and added 4 or 5 rooms to the first section. These rooms had belonged in the past to the second section. There, he assembled the camp's Jews, who had previously been mixed in with the Europeans, and separated them from the French, or rather, from the Europeans. This wretched Derrico was responsible for yet more provocations. The Europeans to one side, the Arabs to one side, same for the Jews. The latter, again, share the first section. The same courtyard serves both Muslims and Jews. There was no doubt Derrico did this with the intention of seeing Jews slaughtered by Muslims. Since there were not many Jews, but the Jews understood this scheme, so did the Arabs. Commander Derrico wanted Arabs and Jews to stab one another, but the opposite occurred. A friendly understanding spread between the two communities. Never would you have believed that the Arabs and the Jews in the camp's first section would become real friends, even brothers. Indeed, whether they wanted it or not, they were brothers in hunger, suffering, misery, sorrow in Derrico's camp. I would like to conclude by simply paying homage not only to the Muslim militants, and in particular to the organizers, but also to the Jews who knew how to thwart all of Derrico's and his deputies' petty attempts to provoke incidents among Arabs and Jews.
Twisted measure.
Night and day, light and dark, any day could be torn in half. Only God, a human heart.
Many of you know Boaz Avram Katz as our Jewish educator and Hebrew instructor here on campus. He is also member of the Jewish Studies Program Advisory Board. And for the past years, he has been the one to take the lead on organizing these ceremonies that we have together around Yom Hashoah. We had them sometimes on the day, but Numen Lumen has really become our home for this particular form of remembrance. And so I'm really grateful for his leadership. And as Director of Jewish Studies, it is an honor to invite him to share some reflections with you about how he has been guiding our community in this remembrance, and also how and why we shared the topic for today's commemoration. Boaz.
Thank you very much, everybody. I am third-generation Holocaust survivor, which means that my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. And for many years, growing up in Israel, the idea of talking about the Holocaust, discussing the Holocaust, was not something that was done. The idea was that you came from there, you came into the new land, and you figured it out. It was put under the rug. We didn't talk about it. We didn't discuss. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't ask my grandmother any questions. Which was, if you think about it, I regret it so much today. As somebody who has been studying the Holocaust for 10 years, who has been immersed in the study of the Holocaust. But about 10 years ago, I don't know what happened, I took a class about Anne Frank. I'm sure many of you read the Diary of Anne Frank in some capacity. And then I said, wait a minute, why am I not studying more about this? Why am I not more interested in this? And this basically opened the floodgates for class after class after class. So much so that I even attempted I started a PhD in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. But changed my mind later because I think that I need to be in the field with students rather to in some, library somewhere in the... So I opted to go for a master's and made that simpler, and I got that. One of my ways of dealing with the Holocaust is to organize these things. It's to organize these commemorations. I've done it for many, many years, not only here, but also in Israel. And this was my way of dealing with this. I was super surprised, and so I was very surprised when my mother told me one day, the Nazis had an effect on us too in Morocco. And I said, what do you mean? How? I know that, they never entered Morocco, they never went into Morocco. But one of the things that Mohammed V did, who was the king of Morocco at the time, he had all these edicts that he sent out that followed very much the French government at the time. And in one of them, One of the things that Jews were very proud of, that they were able to leave the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto called the Melach. She was from a city called Meknes, if you've ever been to Morocco. And the idea was always to get out of the ghetto and live in the new neighborhoods in the city. That was like, you made it, kind of thing. You know, you arrived, your economic situation has improved, you were able to live in a nice home, and so on and so forth. And she remembers, she was a little girl, and she remembers that there was an edict. And the edict basically said that they had to take their bags and move back into the ghetto. Which was, as you can imagine, an awful, just like return to what they did. And I started talking to her a little bit about it, and she remembers all kinds of stories and different things and how hard it was. And it was like, okay. And that led me later on to start investigating more about the Jews of North Africa and what happened to them and how they encountered the Holocaust. So that was just a little bit about this. I've been doing this for how long? I don't know. 5 years? I don't know. Yeah. 6, 7, 5, yeah. So I've been doing it for a bit. And it's my labor of love. It's my way of remembering my family and remembering all those who passed. And thank you. I'm going to ask Samantha.
We now invite you to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust as we light candles to remember those who perished, those who supported the victims of Nazi persecution, or liberated the survivors.
We light our candles by passing a light of memory and hope from one to another. Let us honor those whose lights were put out, whose dreams, hopes, and lives were snuffed out before they even lived, for 1.5 million children. We light a candle for the untold millions for whom there is no one to mourn, whose entire families were annihilated, and who lie in unmarked graves.
We light a candle for those who stood upright while others were bending to a moral will, for the righteous among nations who risked and even gave their lives to help their fellow human beings. We light a candle for those brave soldiers who liberated the camps, who carried the dead and near dead in their arms to a kinder and more humane future, and for those who served with the Allied forces to put the end to tyranny and oppression.
We light a candle for the nearly 6 million Jews and for the 5 million non-Jews who perished in a planned system of human destruction, the scale of which had never before been even imagined. We light a candle for those who live even now under the yoke of oppression, in places where the threat of genocide is real and ever-present.
I would like to ask Roma to recite the Monos Kaddish.
Please rise as you are able. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'ama divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'hayachon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayed kol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'amei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shmei dekudesha brichu. Le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, damiram bi'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen. Ose shalom v'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru. Amen.
Sit down. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who came this morning. Thank you to our readers. Thank you to everybody, Twisted Measure, as always. We must remember so that it will not happen again. I thank you for joining us today, and we have some light refreshments in the lobby. Thank you.